Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Zayin Amud Beis and Daf Ches Amud Aleph. Let's begin by looking at a general outline of this Gemara. In the previous Gemara, we presented teachings from Rav Gidol and Rav Chisda, just to see the general flow of things. On Daf Vav Amud Aleph, we presented a brisa that spoke about the four Rishuyos of Shabbos: a Rishus HaYachid, a Rishus HaRabim, a Karmelis, and a Mokim Torah. First, the Gemara discussed the part of the brisa that spoke about a Rishus HaYachid and a Rishus HaRabim. Then the Gemara moved on to discuss the part of the brisa that spoke about a Karmelis. In the next piece of Gemara, we presented additional cases of a Karmelis, as well as laid out the parameters for a Karmelis. In that Gemara, we brought up teachings from Rav Gidol and Rav Chisda. And in that regard, our Gemara now is going to focus on these two teachings of Rav Gidol and Rav Chisda. So there's two parts to our Gemara. Number one, the Gemara will discuss a way of influencing the din in the case in the teaching of Rav Gidol. Rav Gidol spoke about a certain case, and the din over there, we're going to speak about a way of influencing the din in that case. In the second part of this Gemara, the Gemara will discuss if the teaching of Rav Chisda only fits with Rebbe and not with the Rabbanan. Could we say that the teaching of Rav Chisda fits with both Rebbe and the Rabbanan, or are we forced to say that it only fits with Rebbe? So basically, this piece of Gemara is going to focus in on two teachings that we presented in the previous piece of Gemara, one from Rav Gidol and one from Rav Chisda. So let's see the first part of the Gemara now in the flowchart form. So just to bring back down the previous Gemara in the flowchart to see where the teaching of Rav Gidol was mentioned, it's over here. We mentioned it as part of explaining our question, what's v'tefeses adasara? And we said it can't mean something because we have the teaching of Rav Gidol that won't allow us to say that's what it means. And the teaching of Rav Gidol was, we could see it's in that box, Rav Gidol said a house that's not 10 tefachim high, and its roof makes it 10 tefachim high, so on the roof it's a Rishus HaYachid and a person can carry in the whole thing. And inside the house a person can only carry within 4 amos. So that's the teaching of Rav Gidol that we're going to be discussing in this Gemara. So the Gemara begins by saying, Gufa, the teaching itself of Rav Gidol. That's what we're going to focus on. He said a house that's not 10 tefachim high and its roof makes it 10 tefachim, the din is on the roof a person can carry on the whole thing. And inside he can't carry more than 4 amos. So on this, Abaya said, and it's in a purple arrow pointing upwards, because it's a teaching related to what Rav Gidol said, and that is if the person carves out an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide on the ground. So let's say, for example, the house is 9 tefachim high. The person dug into the ground and carved out an area that was a tefach deep, and in addition it was 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. Abai said in such a case, and he made it 10, now he made the height of the house 10 tefachim in that area, he can carry inside the entire house as well. So we'll just show over here an image of what it was. The house itself was, for example, 9 tefachim, but with that extra tefach, it's 10 tefachim. And the person carved out an area 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide inside the house, and making it that over there, the house should be 10 tefachim high. The din is, says Abai, a person could carry in the whole thing. Now we can understand why a person can carry within those 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. Now it's not even dalet amos, but we can understand why we view it as a Rishus HaYachid, since it has the dimensions of a Rishus HaYachid. It's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and the walls are 10 tefachim high. However, why is a person allowed to carry in the rest of the house as well? The rest of the house, the height is only 9 tefachim. So there it's continued in the teaching of Abaya. What's the reason? And it's referring to his heter to carry in the entire house, not just where he carved out the area that's 10 tefachim high. The reason is since it's chayre Rishus HaYachid, which are Rishus HaYachid, the size of the house that are not 10 tefachim high. So for example, they're 9 tefachim high, we view them as chayre Rishus HaYachid, which are holes in the walls of a Rishus HaYachid. Where just like holes in the walls of a Rishus HaYachid are chayre Rishus HaYachid, they have the status of a Rishus HaYachid, so to the rest of the house, relative to the area that is a Rishus HaYachid, is viewed as chayre Rishus HaYachid, and they have the status of a Rishus HaYachid, and therefore a person can carry in the whole thing. So really, in essence over here, although we can see it's a very small part of the Gemara, in essence over here we have the heart of this piece of Gemara, which is the teaching of Abaya, that if a person were to carve out an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and complete the height of the house in that area to 10 tefachim, he's now allowed to carry in the entire house. And the explanation is, since we view the rest of the house as chayre Rishus HaYachid. Now the Gemara brings a supporting teaching to this, that chayre Rishus HaYachid are a Rishus HaYachid. So the Gemara says, the itmar, like we learned, chayre Rishus HaYachid are Rishus HaYachid. And in addition, in that teaching, it also speaks about chayre Rishus HaRabim, holes in the walls of Rishus HaRabim. So the Gemara brings that down as well and says, chayre Rishus HaRabim, over there there's an argument. Abaya says, are Rishus HaRabim. Abaya says, just like the holes in Rishus HaYachid have the status of the Rishus HaYachid, the holes in the walls of a Rishus HaRabim also have the status of a Rishus HaRabim. However, Rava argues and says they are not. They're not a Rishus HaRabim. Rather, we look at each one, and based on its dimensions, we give it the status of what what rishus, what domain it has. If it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, then it'll be a karmelis, and if it's less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, then it'll be a makom ptor. So really here we have the entire Gemara, the point, the main discussion of this Gemara, which is that if a person were to carve out an area, he is now permitted to carry in the whole house, since the rest of the house has the status of chayre rishus hayachid, which are a rishus hayachid, and the Gemara brings a supportive teaching to this, that chayre rishus hayachid are rishus hayachid. And in addition, we brought down over there as well, since it's part of the teaching, the din of a chayre rishus harabim, which there it's an argument. And as a result of this, we now get into a side discussion. So that has to be emphasized over here, that from here onwards, although it's the larger part of the Gemara, it's a side discussion, which is, since we mentioned the din of chayre rishus harabim, that it's a machlekes, the Gemara presents over here 2 questions that Rava had on Abaya. That Abaya says chayre rishus harabim are considered a rishus harabim. Rava has 2 questions on Abaya. So let's see those 2 questions. First, the Gemara presents the question, which is, Rava asked, so why isn't the Keren Zavas a smuchel rishus harabim or chayre rishus harabim? According to Abaya, when there's a rishus harabim, and along the rishus harabim there are houses lined up, and one house is removed, so there's an extra corner over there, that should be looked at as chayre rishus harabim, which are rishus harabim. But we know, we said in the previous Gemara, 2 pieces prior, that this area is considered a karmelis. And when the Brisa says viha karmelis, it's referring to this case. According to Abaya, it should be considered a rishus harabim, since it's just like a chayre rishus harabim, a hole in the wall of the rishus harabim. Also, this is sort of like a hole in the rishus harabim. So Abaya answered that there it's not convenient to use, and here to use it, here it is. By the Keren Zavas Asmuchel Rishus Harabim, since it's removed from the Rishus Harabim, the public can't comfortably walk there. They can't navigate that area. There are houses all along. There's one little corner that's empty. The public can't use it in a comfortable way. It's not convenient. And therefore it can't be, and it's not considered a Rishus Harabim. However, the holes in the wall of the Rishus Harabim, the public could use. They could place things in it. So therefore, Rabbi explains that it's not enough just to be a chayre Rishus Harabim. It also needs to be convenient for the public to use it. And by a hole in the wall, it is convenient for the public to use it. Therefore, it has the status of a Rishus Harabim. However, this corner off the Rishus Harabim, it's not convenient for the public to use it, and therefore it's not considered a Rishus Harabim. Then Rava presents a second question on Abaya, and this question begins with some background information. So it's a purple arrow pointing downward, since it's information that leads into a question. And that is, we learned in the Mishnah that if one throws an item 4 am inside a wall, and we already learned this Mishnah previously, the din is, if it's above 10 tefachim, it's like throwing in the air, and the person's going to be putter. However, if it's within 10 tefachim, if the item hit the wall within 10 tefachim, it's like throwing it on the ground. Just like if it landed on the ground, he threw it from a distance of 4 amas, he's going to be chayiv for carrying 4 amas in rishus harabim. So too, if he threw it at the wall, he'll also be chayiv. And it was asking this, and we asked, how is it like throwing on the ground? But it didn't rest. If a person threw an item at a wall, it's certain to bounce back and land within 4 amas. So it didn't rest at the end of 4 amas. It rested within 4 amas. So why is he chayiv? Why do we compare when he throws it at the wall as if it rested on the ground? When he throws it at the wall, it's certain to bounce back and rest within 4 amas. And Rabbi Yochanan explained that it's talking about a fatty fig that's stuck to the wall. So that's the background information that's going to lead into a question. And that is as follows. Rava asks Abaya, according to you, Abaya, that you hold that the holes of rishus harabim have the status of rishus harabim. So let's see the question. If chayre rishus harabim are rishus harabim, why say it's a case of a fig? Say it went into a hole. Why did we establish it in this rare and uncommon case that the person threw a fatty fig? We could simply establish it in a case that he threw it and it landed in a hole in the wall. That's much more common and likely to happen. So Rava asks Abaya, according to me, it makes sense that we don't establish it in such a case, since I hold that the person won't be chayiv if it fell in the hole, because the hole is either a karmelis or a makom ptor. There's no chayiv for such an act of carrying 4 amas into a karmelis or a makom ptor. However, according to you, that it is going to be chayiv, since it's a chayre rishus harabim, why don't we choose to establish in such a case? Clearly, we can see, says Rava, that the whole of a rishus harabim is not a rishus harabim, and that's why we weren't able to explain that it's referring to that case. So the Gemara says that Abaya at times would answer Rava with one answer, and at times he would answer him with a different answer. So we have 2 answers from Abaya. Says the Gemara, sometimes he would say it would bounce out, that it's actually much more likely for the person to throw a fig on the wall and it should stick, than he should throw an item into a hole in the wall and it should stay there. And the reason is because if a person throws an item at a wall and it lands in the hole, it's much more likely, and it's very likely to bounce out. And therefore the Gemara prefers to establish it in this case, which is rare and uncommon, of a fatty fig that stuck to the wall, better than a case that it landed and remained in the hole, because that's much less likely. So that's one answer that Abaye would give Rava, and that is that yes, it could be a wall that had holes in it, but we're not going to talk about that it landed and rested in the holes because it's very unlikely. And the second answer he gave him is that we're actually not talking about over here a wall that has holes. It's a wall without holes. And how we know that we'll bring out in a second. But the main thing is to see the answer itself. So here we have two answers from Abaye. One answer is that it could be a wall that has holes in it, but it's certain that that it's much more likely that it'll bounce out of the holes than that it should be referring to a fatty fig, and therefore the answer of a fatty fig is better. The second answer is this is a wall that certainly there's no holes in it. Now, how do we know that? The Gemara brings the support to this. How do we know this? And he explains how we know it is from this that the Reisha says that above 10 tefachim it's like throwing in the air. We said that if you threw it above 10 tefachim it's like throwing in the air. Now if it was a fatty fig that stuck to the wall, we could understand why it's throwing in the air. Since it's stuck to the wall above 10 tefachim, higher than 10 tefachim in a Rosh Hashanah is a makim p'tur. However, if it landed in a hole above 10 tefachim, then the person should be chayiv. And if there's a hole, why is it like thrown in the ear? But it rested in the hole. We're going to say above 10 tefachim it rested in the hole, and below 10 tefachim, within 10 tefachim it rested in the hole. Now, if it rested in a hole above 10 tefachim, the person's not going to be patur. He's going to be chayiv. It's not like thrown in the ear, since it's a rishus hayachid. Now, why is it a rishus hayachid? If it has an area of 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, we could understand why it's a rishus hayachid. It's more than 10 tefachim high, and it has an area of 4 by 4, so it's a rishus hayachid. The Gemara is saying it's a rishus hayachid in all instances, even if it's less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So the Gemara now supports this with another arrow, so it's supporting this, and it'll lead into the conclusion as well. So it's an arrow pointing upwards and downwards. And if you'll say it's less than 4 by 4, says the Gemara, but Rav Yehuda said that such a case is a machlekes. If a person threw an item and it landed in a hole above 10 tefachim from the ground, and that hole was less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, Rav Yehuda said in this case we're going to have a machlekes. The machlekes is going to be that Rav Meir says choykikin lahashlim. Rav Meir says that we carve it to complete it. We view as if the hole was carved to be 4 by 4 and is considered a rishus hayachid. And the Rabbanan say, we don't say choykikin lahashlim. Now, our Mishnah that spoke about a person throwing an item 4 amos in the Rishus Harabim is a Stam Mishnah which follows Reb Meir. So therefore it'll come out that Reb Meir is of the opinion, and our Mishnah is of the opinion, that if it landed in a hole above 10 tefachim, it's always considered a Rishus hayachid. If it's 4 by 4, it's certainly a Rishus hayachid. Even if it's not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, we say choykikin lahashlim to complete it to 4 by 4 according to Reb Meir. So therefore it cannot be referring to that it went into a hole, not because it's less likely to remain there, but because then that wouldn't be the din. And just to bring now the background, where the Reb Meir and the Rabbanan argue. So they argue regarding a mezuzah. If there's a doorway that's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, however the problem is, so then it should typically be chayiv in a mezuzah. However the problem is that it's not 4 tefachim wide at the very top, since it rounds out. Reb Meir says, choykikin lahashlim. We carve it out to complete it. We view it as if it is carved out and the door is chayiv in a mezuzah. So the Gemara says, so therefore we cannot say that it's talking about that it went into a hole, because above 10 tefachim the person then would be chayiv for throwing into Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara concludes, Elalav shma mina. Do we not hear from here because of the less bechor that it's a wall that does not have holes in it? Shma mina, yes, we do hear it from here. So to summarize, we basically really presented over here in this Gemara the teaching of Abaye, which is that if the person carved an area on the ground 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and it was deep enough that it completed the height of the house to now be 10 tefachim high, he's allowed to carry in the whole thing. And the explanation for the heta to carry in the whole house, not just in that area, that the whole house is considered Rishus hayachid, is because it's chayre Rishus hayachid, which are like a Rishus hayachid. And in order to support that, the Gemara brought a teaching that says chayre Rishus hayachid are Rishus hayachid. And in addition, we brought the rest of the teaching down, which was that chayre Rishus harabim is a machlekes. Abaye says it is considered a Rishus Harabim, and Rava says it's not. And being that we brought down this machlekes between Rava and Abaye, we brought down 2 questions that Rava had on Abaye. The first question was, how come a Keren Zavas, a Smuchel Rishus Harabim, is not viewed as a Choy Rishus Harabim and considered and given the status of Rishus Harabim? And Abaye responded, it's because it's not convenient to use that area. And the second question was, how come we didn't say that the reason the person's chayav when he threw 4 amos at a wall is because it landed in a hole in the wall? And the 2 answers Abaye gave was, number 1, it's very unlikely to stay in the hole. It's much more likely to bounce out, and we prefer therefore to speak about a fig that's stuck to the wall. And the second answer is that it's certainly not a wall that has holes in it, because if it was such a wall, then he wouldn't just be chayev when he threw it lower than 10 tefachim, or then he'd be chayev for throwing 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah. He'd also be chayev when he threw it higher than 10 tefachim for throwing it into a Rosh Hashanah. And we established that it will always be a Rosh Hashanah, whether it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide or not, since our Mishnah is a Stam Mishnah which fits with Rav Meir, and therefore it's not a wall that has holes in it. So with that, we're finished the first part of the Gemara that spoke about the teaching of Rav Gidl. And now we'll move to the second part of the Gemara, which speaks about the teaching of Rav Chisda, which once again is also mentioned in an arrow, where he brought down the teaching of Rav Chisda in the third paragraph. But Rav Chisda said, if one stuck a pole in Rosh Hashanah and one threw an item onto it from the Rosh Hashanah, he is chayiv because the Rosh Hashanah goes up to the sky. So over there we have the teaching of Rav Chisda that a Rosh Hashanah is Eila Adla Rekia. So the Gemara says, Gufa. Let's look at the teaching itself of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda taught, if one stuck a pole in Rosh Hashanah and one threw an item onto it from the Rosh Hashanah, he's chayiv, even though the pole is very high, since the Rosh Hashanah goes up to the sky. So here what the Gemara is going to focus on is not the actual thing that Rav Chisda is teaching, that Rosh Hashanah goes up to the sky, but rather something else that we learn from Rav Chisda. And that is that Rav Chisda holds that in the Rosh Hashanah it's not necessary for the hanacha to be on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And we see this from Rav Chisda, since a pole is not something 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So the Gemara now begins and says, and it's in a green circle. The reason it's in a green circle because it's a conclusion, and something the Gemara wants to establish based on what we just learned from Rav Chisda. So let us say that Rav Chisda holds like Rebbe. Rav Chisda will only fit like Rebbe and not like the Rabbanan. Now before we present this teaching, we're just going to point out over here that this teaching that we're about to bring up, where there's a machlekes between Rebbe and the Rabbanan, was already presented earlier in the Gemara in Daf Dalet Amud Beis. However, over here Rashi learns it in the Havamina different than he learned it in the Havamina over there, and in the Maskana he presents 2 ways of learning it here, and we're going to present the one that doesn't fit with the way he learns it over there. So it's going to come out that we're going to learn the teaching over here differently than we learned it over there in Daf Dalet Amud Beis. So let us say that Rav Chisda holds like Rebbe. Where is this teaching of Rebbe? We learned in a Brisa. If one threw an item from the Rosh Hashanah and it landed on a ziz kolshehu, on a small place, and the way we understand it is he threw it from the Rosh Hashanah into the Rosh Hashanah and it landed on a small area. The din is as follows. Rebbe says he's chayiv, and the Rabbanan say he's pater. So it seems that Rebbe holds his chayiv. Rebbe clearly says it's not necessary in the Rosh Hashanah to have a hanocha on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And the Rabbanan say he's pater because they hold that it is necessary even in the Rosh Hashanah to have a hanocha on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So let us make the conclusion that Rav Chisda fits with Rebbe and he doesn't fit with the Rabbanan. And the Gemara presents from Abaya that he rejects this conclusion, and he says that we can rather say that in Rosh Hashanah everybody agrees with Rav Chisda, that we don't need an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. We're able to explain it in such a way that everybody's in agreement, both Rebbe and the Rabbanon, that in the Rosh Hashanah it's not necessary for the hanacha to be on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. What are they arguing about over here? Here it's a case of a tree that's in the Rosh Hashanah and its branch is in the Rosh Hashanah. So when it says Zarak v'nachal ziz kolshehu, it's referring to the branch that's extended into the Rosh Hashanah. And the machlekes is as follows. Rebbe holds Amrinan Shadi Neifei Basiri Kare. We cast the branch after the trunk. We say, just like the trunk is in Rosh Hashanah, we also view the branch as being in Rosh Hashanah. And since it's viewed as in the Rosh Hashanah, and everybody holds that in the Rosh Hashanah we don't need a hanacha on an area that's 4 by 4, therefore the person is chayiv since it had a hanacha in the Rosh Hashanah, and it's not necessary to be an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And the Rabbanans hold Layamrin and Shadi Neifi Basiri Kari. We don't say cast the branch after the trunk. Rather, the trunk is in Rosh Hashanah and the branch is in Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, even if he were to throw it 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah and it landed on the branch, he's going to be putter since the branch doesn't have an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So it comes out that if it were in Rosh Hashanah, everybody would agree that he's chayiv, since we don't need a hanach on an area that's 4 by 4. The argument is it considered in Rosh Hashanah or not? Rebbe says it is, and therefore he's chayiv because we don't need the hanacha to be on an area that's 4 by 4. The Rabbanan say it's not in the Rosh Hashanah, and therefore he's pater because in the Rosh Hashanah we do need a hanacha on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So to summarize, we wanted to establish and conclude that Rav Chisda would only fit with Rebbe and not the Rabbanan, and the Gemara challenged and rejected this and said it's possible to explain that it will fit with both of them, and over there it's an entirely different case. It's not that he threw it into the Rosh Hashanah, rather on a branch that's extended from the Rosh Hashanah, and the argument's about a different matter, whether the branch follows the trunk or it doesn't follow the trunk. So with that we have a an overview of just to summarize, what we have over here is the two pieces of Gemara, one that focused on the teaching of Rav Gidl, one that focused on the teaching of Rav Chisda. In the teaching of Rav Gidl, we presented a way that the din could change, and in the teaching of Rav Chisda, we discussed whether it fits only with Rebbe or it can also fit with the Rabbanan.